Hello and welcome back to the It Depends Lessons in Technology Leadership podcast. I, as always, am your host. My name is Kevin Goldsmith, and in every episode, we talk about different aspects of technology leadership, and I try and share some of the experience I've had as a CTO and VP and director and engineering manager in technology over the last 30 plus years. This week, I was talking to my friend Pavel, somebody I mentor and have mentored for a while, about what it takes to move into a director role. He's doing really well. His scope is growing. He's delegating. He's building roadmaps. But in the middle of the conversation, he surfaced a dynamic that I think every leader runs into at some point. An issue shows up, you see it. You don't have to answer yet, so you set it aside. But by the time you come back to it, your boss has already stepped in. Now, that's not a scheduling problem. That's an ownership problem. And it's one of the most common and most invisible ways leaders undercut their own credibility. You don't even realize it's happening because you were planning to handle it. You just didn't say so. I've been on both sides of this, the person who waited too long and the boss watching the thread, wondering why nobody is picking it up. Ownership gets thrown around constantly in leadership conversations, but what people usually mean by it is something closer to enthusiasm or engagement. That's not what I mean. That's not what we're talking about today. I mean a specific set of behaviors that signal to the rest of the organization that this is handled, that I am taking responsibility for my area. The tension is not between caring and not caring. Most leaders care a lot. The tension is between doing and managing. Especially when you're overwhelmed, that ownership feels like more work, not less. The instinct is to triage. I can't solve this right now, so I'll come back to it. But what the organization sees is silence. And silence reads as nobody's on top of it. There's some competing forces here. Depth versus breadth. Your workload is expanding, you're being pulled in many directions, and you can't personally solve anything. When you've got a full plate and something comes up, it's just another thing and you're already behind. There's solving versus signaling. There's a difference between solving a problem and making sure the organization knows that someone is solving the problem. And there's also, especially if it's something that's for your team, and maybe some of your team is on it, on this thread or on this Slack channel, there's that temptation of saying, well, the team needs to learn this. So you want to let them step forward. So you're not constantly being the one to answer for the team, which is a good instinct. Stepping back is sometimes the right coaching move, but it's also often used as justification for not stepping in when you should. What's at stake is that if your boss has to step in, you've now demonstrated a gap. Not a gap in skill, but a gap in awareness and responsiveness. When your boss picks up something that's yours, they're not helping you. They're doing your job for you, and everyone sees that. Where I learned this most effectively, or maybe most concretely, was in my first CTO job at Avo. The chief product officer and I had a really good working relationship, but there was some conflict brewing between our teams, specifically in one area. We were both aware of it, and we were both coaching, and it was kind of going back and forth, but we were also trying to let them solve it, to let the teams address it. But that conflict kept going. And eventually my CEO became aware of it. Somebody mentioned it to him, like, this is going on. I don't know why this is still happening. So in our next one-on-one, he said to me, hey, just so you know, I'm hearing about this now. And if I'm hearing about it, I need to step in because it's now getting to me, which means it's not being handled. If it comes to me, I'm going to feel obligated to step in, and I'm going to do a worse job at this than either you or the CPO are, because I'm furthest away from the work. I'm furthest away from the teams. This is something you should be catching before it gets to me. And it's basically the lesson of not that if it's coming to me, you're in trouble, but more that if it's coming to me, it means you let it go on too long. And if you let it go on too long, where it raises to me, that's a bad sign. I feel like I need to step in and solve it because you aren't. So it was a pretty important lesson because we could have solved it, the CPO and I. We could have stepped in and solved it a lot earlier, but we were trying to let the team solve it. And if they had, that would have been great. The problem was they hadn't, and we let it go on too long. This reframed ownership for me. It wasn't about having the answer. It was about not letting the ball hit the floor. If you see a problem, it doesn't mean you have to solve it, especially if your plate's full. You can delegate it, but people just need to know that it's handled. And I think almost every failure I've seen in my own organization has been a piece that I held on to instead of delegating. And that includes to this day, I've learned that lesson, but I haven't learned that lesson, right? You still sometimes get into bad habits where you feel like you need to address it instead of delegating it. And then you get busy, it doesn't get handled, and it doesn't look like you're truly owning the stuff you're supposed to own. Let's talk about the ownership triangle. The 3 parts are signal, route, and verify. Signal. Acknowledge the issue immediately. You don't need the answer, you need to communicate. I see it, I'm on top of it. This is the piece most people skip. They think they need to come back with the answer, but you don't. You just need to let people know you're aware of it and you're working on it. Speed matters here, not the speed of resolution, but the speed of the acknowledgement. Route. Decide who should actually handle it. Is this something you can delegate? Does somebody on your team own this area? If no clear owner exists, you are the owner until you find one. And ownership doesn't mean doing. Ownership means making sure it gets done. And the last is verify. Follow up to confirm that the issue is resolved or progressing. This is where the delegation becomes real. You give it to someone, now make sure that they've delivered. This model works at every level. An engineering manager runs this loop in sprints. A director runs it across quarters, and CTO runs it across the whole organization. This model shows that ownership is a process, not a personality trait. You can build the habit. I did. I learned to do that. I also want to talk about the signal that you're on top of it. Now, if you're a leader and you have people reporting to you and you're all on the same thread or you're all on the same channel, it doesn't mean that the minute somebody says, hey, we have this problem, you need to immediately jump in and say, we've got it, we're on top of it. You can give the people that work for you that time to respond, but if they don't in a timely manner, and what timely is dependent on the severity of the issue. Sites down? Yeah, you acknowledge it immediately. Is it a minor bug that affects almost no users? Okay, few hours, day. But you don't let it go much beyond that, because at that point, it just seems like you're ignoring it. Another important piece here is who's on that thread. There's an aspect of managing up here. If your boss is CC'd on the message, you're going to respond faster. You want to show your boss that it is being handled. Your boss is just wanting to make sure that somebody's paying attention. An issue got raised to them, which meant somebody thought it needed to be seen by them, which usually would be a sign that it's important. And so you want to make sure they know you're treating it with the importance that it deserves. Now, if you're a director or senior manager, you're probably on threads where your directs are responding. If you see silence, sometimes, if it's urgent, you can respond yourself. What I usually prefer to do is contact the person who should be responding, ideally, and let them know, hey, you should respond to this. Better to come from you than me. And if they then don't, which occasionally happens, because a lot of times they're in the middle of dealing with it and they're not really thinking about communicating. If they don't, after you've given them a little bit of time, then you respond. But you ideally kind of poke them and have them respond. But every time you do step in, that's a follow-up conversation. Not punitive, but clarifying. This is why this matters. This is why it's important. I have that conversation on a regular basis sometimes as people learn this habit of just acknowledging, doing that signal. A lot of times people want to wait till they have the perfect answer before saying anything. People would rather look smart when they respond than look fast. But in leadership, fast and incomplete beats slow and thorough every time. Be careful with confusing letting the team learn with not doing your job. There's a time to let the team struggle and grow, absolutely. There's also a time to step in because you're running a company, not a school. Again, you don't have to have the answer. You just have to say, I got it. Everyone goes, cool, it's being handled. That's the most important thing. They just want to make sure that somebody's aware of it. Somebody's on top of it. You then also have to solve it, but you can then focus on solving it correctly and give updates. When I'm looking at a senior engineering manager and thinking, what am I looking for to show that they're ready for the director level? We talked about this in that director to CTO path, that being strategic, thinking 6 to 12 months ahead, anticipating what the team needs to do to achieve the goals of the technology organization. If you work for a director or VP, their goals, the company's goals, that you're aligned to them. But not only that you're thinking about them, but you're thinking strategically about them. You're coming to them with a plan. This is the things that my team is going to do, aligned to these goals, not waiting for your boss to tell you, here's what your team needs to do to satisfy the goals of the organization. You need to own your area. So your boss is telling you where the company needs to go. You come back with a plan to get there. That's ownership at the strategic level. That's owning your area. It's a shift from being reactive to proactive. That is the ownership threshold at the engineering manager level. There are people I'm working with at the director level right now who are wanting to move to the VP level. But what I'm hearing when I talk to them is that their boss is laying out the strategy for their area because they don't see this person doing that. If you're not doing it, it still needs to get done. If your boss is doing it, that's fine, but that's telling them that you're not ready to do it for yourself yet. And for my own directors, this is a conversation we have. If I'm setting your strategy, that's not a good thing. You need to be telling me what your strategy is. And if you do that, we'll have that conversation. And if we're aligned, awesome. I'm done setting your strategy. You set your strategy from now on. But if I don't see that, somebody's got to articulate a strategy for your area. And if you're not doing it, I'm doing it because I own your area at the higher level. And so I need to make sure it's getting done. Just like answering a message in a thread or in a Slack channel if I don't see it happening. What are the boundaries of ownership? Now, I talk about you need to own your area. You need to take responsibility for your area. If there are people that report to you that own this part of your area and they don't respond, you need to, because you need to show that it is being handled because ultimately you are responsible for it. But that can also go wrong. I worked at Microsoft in the 90s. If you have ever seen the org charts of different companies and shows a lot of different org charts and then shows one for Microsoft and all the organizations at Microsoft have guns pointing at each other, I was there. It was true. We had a problem there of people taking responsibility for things that weren't theirs because they wanted to own that area. That was very common. Teams would fight over things like that a lot. That's not ownership, that's empire building. You need to take responsibility for the things that you are responsible for. You need to take ownership of the things that you own. You should not take ownership for the things that you don't own. If you see something that needs to be handled, but it's not part of your team's remit, poke your peer and tell them, hey, have you seen this? That's the right thing to do. That's the best thing for the organization. I don't know if you saw this, but this is popping off and you should probably get in on it. That's the nice thing to do. Often, though, stuff kind of falls between the chairs. It's not really yours. It's not really somebody else's. Do you step in or are you overstepping in that situation? Do you let it go? And then maybe you should have picked it up. You don't want to be an empire builder. You don't want to be political. But this is a problem and still needs to get handled. In that situation, You take ownership of the problem and you say, I'm not sure if this is my team or this other team, but we'll figure it out. And then you do that. You're taking ownership of finding the owner. You're being responsible. That's the right thing to do in that situation. But if you're absorbing other people's work because you want a bigger scope, that can read as predatory. And if somebody tries to do that to you, which I hear about from time to time, this thing was a toss-up and somebody tried to take ownership of it, but it really should have been ours. You can handle that very well by just reaching out to that person saying, hey, I saw that you want to take ownership of this, but I think this is really part of our team. I just didn't see it as quickly as you did. Let's talk about this and let's make sure it's being handled correctly. And if that person, sometimes they're being very overt about what they do, especially in organizations with a lot of conflict and a lot of empire building, which plenty of those exist in the world, you have no other choice in that situation. You have to escalate because either your boss is okay with that, in which case that's a sign to you that in future you need to do that just to protect your area. You need to be on top of things and take ownership very quickly. Or it's also possibly telling you if you don't like doing that, you probably work in the wrong organization. You need to go find a new job. Ownership has to scale with delegation. As you get more senior, you can't hold more. You have to hold differently. I've talked about this a lot in this podcast. At the CTO level, at my level, almost everything's delegated. The ownership is making sure that delegated work actually happens. I always have a full plate. And I have a full plate of sometimes things that I cannot delegate because the sensitivity around them. So I have to do them. And when that happens and that plate is full and something else comes to me, if I take ownership of it, it sometimes gets dropped on the floor. So I have to make sure I delegate. And I delegate the things that I can. But then I have to also make sure that if I'm delegating something that ultimately is my responsibility, I have to follow up and make sure it gets done because the people that work for me are also pretty busy with their own stuff. And so sometimes they get super busy and this thing that may not be the highest priority but still needs to get done falls further and further down their stack. So I need to remind them, hey, this needs to get done. I delegated it to you. Let's make sure this gets done. Or if you can't do it, let me know and I'll find somebody else who can. And that's okay. That's okay. People get busy. It's okay for somebody to say, you know what? I took this on. I really can't do it right now. Maybe we need to give it to somebody else. That's okay. It's better to surface it and to talk about it than to silently try and hold on to it and it doesn't happen. The places where I've screwed up and recently have been where I kept stuff for myself that I didn't need to. I could have absolutely delegated and I probably should have. And honestly, it's very easy to get into the place where I'm too busy to delegate. I've got too much stuff I need to delegate because I'm super busy, but I can't delegate because I'm super busy and I don't have time to give the context to someone else or set somebody else up for success. I make that mistake. I still make that mistake, and it is a mistake. Me owning it doesn't mean I need to do it myself. It just means I can't let it hit the floor. I can't let it get ignored. I also want to talk a little bit about ownership versus accountability because they're not the same. It seems like they're the same. I'm being accountable for I own this, right? I also use the word responsibility. These are all interrelated words. They have similar but different meaning. I am accountable for my organization. I also own areas for the company. I am also responsible for those areas. Similar words, similar meanings, used differently. Now let's talk very specifically about ownership versus accountability. Ownership is proactive. It's about claiming responsibility before there's a problem. I see this, it's mine, I'm on it. That's forward looking. Accountability is retrospective. It's standing behind what happened after the fact. This was my area, I'll answer for the outcome. You can be accountable for something you never owned. If you delegated a decision and it went badly, you're accountable for the result, even though you weren't the one that made the call. That is the deal. You can also own something in the moment and still dodge accountability later, but that's a different kind of failure. The reason this distinction matters is that most organizations talk about accountability constantly, but rarely talk about ownership as a behavior. Accountability only kicks in after something goes wrong. Ownership is how you prevent it from going wrong in the first place. Accountability asks, whose fault was this? Ownership asks, who's on it right now? Let's talk about the human aspect of this. You're a manager. There's a thread about an issue. The person who would own that issue on your team isn't responding to this discussion. They're usually not ignoring it. They're overwhelmed. Maybe they're triaging. Maybe they see the issue, they don't have an answer, and they'll figure they'll come back to it, and then they don't. The mental reframe that helps is, this is not a thing I need to solve. This is a thing I need to manage. You don't need to solve the problem. You need to manage the problem. This is the thing you need to explain to them. If you're that person who owns the problem, but your boss is jumping in, they're not trying to micromanage you. They're trying to assess whether their team has the problem. I don't want to step in, but if nobody else does, I feel like I have to. And that's the right framing. The longer the silence, the stronger the signal that nobody is in control. For the team that's observing this dynamic, let's say a message is sent to a team channel. We have this problem, and nobody from the team responds to it. And then you as a senior leader jump in because you want to let people know, yes, we're on it, we're taking care of it. When that happens, it signals to that whole team that the manager of that team wasn't on top of the situation. This quietly erodes trust and authority, even if nobody talks about it. Your behavior teaches the organization how safe it actually is to make decisions without you, but it also teaches the organization whether you're paying attention. Early on, I thought ownership meant being the smartest person in the room and having the answer. That works, actually. When you have a small team and direct responsibility for the work, it totally breaks at scale. The evolution for me was realizing that ownership is mostly about responsiveness and routing, not about expertise. I don't need to know everything about every issue. I need to know who does, how to get the answer fast, and how to make sure the organization knows it's handled. The hardest part of this transition was letting go of the doing. There's a real satisfaction in solving the problem for yourself. Delegating the solution to somebody else feels less satisfying, especially the first few times. There's a book I don't think I've recommended before. You'll see it in lots of lists of books about management. It's Team of Teams by General McChrystal. It talks about how stepping back from personal decision-making feels like shirking responsibility. You should read that book. If you're looking for management literature, especially outside our little world of technology, this is a good book. I used to conflate staying close to the work with being a good leader. They're not necessarily the same thing. Staying close can be a good way of avoiding the harder work of managing through others. I'm responsible for a tremendous amount of stuff. I don't need to know everything about it. We talked a lot about this in earlier podcasts. I just need to know who to talk to and how to get the answers quickly. Ownership is not a feeling. It's a behavior. Specifically, it's 3 behaviors: signal, route, verify. The test for any leader is that when something comes in that touches your area, how fast does the organization know that someone is on it? Not how fast does it get solved. How fast does someone own it publicly? If you're constantly the person your boss has to follow up with, you're not demonstrating ownership, no matter how good your eventual work is. A challenge this week: look at the threads and issues that come through your area. For each one, ask yourself, did I signal fast enough? Did I route it to the right person? Did I verify that it got done? The organization doesn't need you to be the person that solves every problem. It needs to know that nothing in your area gets dropped. Nothing hits the floor. Thanks, everybody. I hope this has been helpful. A little bit shorter of an episode than I usually do, but this was something that came up fresh this week, and I really wanted to talk about it. It's something that I hadn't talked about, I think, ever, which always excites me. and I'd rather give it the right amount of time. I will see you next week in the newsletter. I will see you back here in 2 weeks on the podcast. Have a great week. Thanks so much for listening. Please, again, subscribe, rate, share episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.